Hello, everyone. This is Janice Thomas, and welcome to Discovering You, where we're here to connect purpose, leadership, community to the mission of improving student outcomes. I am your host, and today we are engaging in an important conversation about governance, what it is, why it matters, and how it impacts every student, every school, and every community. But before I actually get started, I would like to read this disclaimer. This conversation is for educational and informational purposes only. This is a nonpartisan platform dedicated to promoting effective governance and civic engagement. Any opinions shared by guests or hosts are their own and not endorsement of any candidate, policy, or political organization. Across Texas, voters are preparing to elect school board trustees who will shape the direction of public education for years to come. What many may not realize is that Texas legislature has clearly defined by law the role and responsibilities of school boards, which is to set the vision and goals for the district, to hire and evaluate the superintendent, to adopt policies and oversee the budget and ensure accountability for student outcomes. Today, I am honored to welcome National School Board Governance Coach Eric A.J. Crable, a leading voice in school board governance. He has worked with districts and education leaders across the country to strengthen how school boards govern for student outcomes. And he has also authored two powerful books, Great on Their Behalf and Our Tuesday Deserve, which have inspired educators and board members across the nation. With years of experience in transforming leadership practices, he specializes in helping school boards and superintendents align their decision with student success. What makes Crable's work so powerful is the emphasis on changing adult behaviors to change student outcomes. The philosophy that I deeply align with the work that we do here at Discovering You. Welcome, Mr. Crable. How are you today?
I'm well. Janice, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here and to talk about this very important conversations about effective school board governance. I know you overheard me reading your little bio, so do you have something to add to that? Like, what are you currently doing now?
A lot of my time is spent just working with individual schools around student-led restorative practices and really trying to identify how do we, as school systems, make sure that students have access to a lot of the tools that they need to be successful, not only in the classroom, but beyond in life. And with school boards around really setting the tone for their school systems grounded in the vision and values of the community, and doing the work of the school board necessary to really drive the behavior of the administration in a direction that's focused on student outcomes rather than just focused on the wants and whims of adults. And so between those two activities, that's what takes up the majority of my time.
So I know with the school boards, you talked about you have a team, and can you kind of like share with the audience, like, how did y'all get involved in this work? What prompted you to be involved? You was a school board member yourself, a school board trustee, right? Where was that at?
I think what got me involved, I think what got gets most of us involved is a lot of us just come to this in the role of parents. That we're just trying to advocate for what's best for our own children, our own home, just as I suspect you and many of your listeners do. And I have to think that you show up at one too many parent association meetings and you'll wind up on the school board, and show up at one too many school board meetings and you wind up, being the chair of the school board. And so it's, I wouldn't say that it's intention as much as just necessity that drove that my advocacy not only be for the community at large, but certainly just be for my own children, my own home.
Okay. So we're going to dive into our conversation. And one of the things, since we are talking about the school system, could you tell our audience, why do school system exist?
Yeah, this is an important question because it often gets confused because there are so many things that a school system does. Like, so for example, school systems often provide transportation in the form of busing to get kids from their homes to the schools. School systems often provide, breakfast, lunch, sometimes dinner. School systems provide extracurricular activities after school, on the weekends, before school. There are so many things that school systems do that it's often easy to confuse those with why school systems exist. School systems really exist, my team and I say, for one reason only, and that's to cause improvements in what children know and are able to do so that they can live a choice-filled life and really meet the needs of themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. That if we aren't setting children up for liberation, we're setting them up for bondage. And so the intention of schooling is to really help children develop the set of knowledge and skills necessary so they can live a choice-filled life. All of the other things that school systems do then need to be in service of that purpose, in service of that mission. And so if we're going to do busing, then the question should be, how is this helping us position children so that they can gain the knowledge and skills necessary to live a choice-filled life? If we're going to do school lunches, then we need to ask ourselves, okay, how is this positioning us? That everything that the school system does needs to really be in service of how do we position children to have the access to opportunity that we want for our own children and that we want for all the kids in our community. That's why school systems exist.
Well, I mean, with explaining how the school system exists, when you talk about the school board, how does their role exist from that?
Yeah.
I've been in many conversations, and then before I realized, I'm like, oh, you're talking about the school system. You're not really talking about the school board. So how does that differ?
Yeah, well, and here too, I think there's common misconceptions. I think if you ask most school board members and say, why do school boards exist? They say, well, we exist to hire and fire the superintendent and to set policy and adopt the budget. And I said, those are things that school boards do, but they're not why the school board exists. We'd say that why the school board exists is to represent the vision and values of the community. That the community is the rightful, moral, legal owners of the school system, and the community has its representatives who are making decisions on its behalf, and that is why the school board exists. What the school board does to enact that representational role is hiring and firing superintendents and setting policy and doing all these other things. But if the board is doing those in a way that is not respective of the vision and values of the community, then the board isn't doing the thing for which it exists to do. And so it's not enough to do the things, just like having buses and serving lunches that's not enough for a school system to do, because that's not why the school system exists. Those things need to be done and calibrated in such that they are in pursuit of why the school system exists. Same thing for the board. The board is hiring, firing superintendents and setting policy and adopting things, that shouldn't just be done for its own benefit, that it needs to be done in pursuit of how are we representing the vision of this community for what it wants students to know and be able to do? How are we representing the values of the community, the non-negotiables that have to be honored while on the journey to the vision? This is why school boards exist, which again is just distinct from what school boards do to enact their why.
Okay. Well, thank you. A lot of your work is around effective school board governance, right? You and your team, you're there to actually support school boards in governing in their role and their responsibilities. And so how do you distinguish the effective school boards from one that's just compliant, just being in compliance? Is there a distinction
Yeah.
there?
So we actually look at two different categories of behavior when we're thinking about it. How would you evaluate a school board? We look at, you can evaluate them on their degree of professionalism, and that kind of ranges from highly professional to highly non-professional. But you could also evaluate them on their degree of effectiveness, and we'd say from highly effective to highly ineffective. When we say professional, this is actually what most people are talking about, and it's actually the less important of the two. When we talk about is a board behaving professionally, what we're really saying is, are they behaving in a way that allows the business of the board to be conducted? Are they conducting the meetings in a manner that actually allows people to be heard, that allows the minority to be heard while allowing the majority to conduct business? Are they conducting themselves in a way that is legal and moral and ethical, not taking bribes and not having secret meetings and things of that nature? Those are all caught up in the question of, is the board behaving in a professional manner? And while those are absolutely important things to do, and we endorse all of that, a board could be highly professional and highly ineffective, because
Wow.
none of these things describe effectiveness of the board at representing the vision and values of the community in the direction of improving student outcomes. These just describe, is the board really conducting itself in a lawful, ethical manner? But a board could actually do all of that and not in any way help the organization move in the direction of children growing in what they know are able to do. That is an entirely separate conversation. That's the conversation, is the board effective? And when we ask, is the board effective, what we're really asking is the board investing its time in a way that actually is driving the focus on improvements in student outcomes? Is the board actually setting goals about what students should know and be able to do, and then monitoring progress to see, are we actually creating the promise of public education for the children in our buildings, or are we not? When boards are behaving that way, we'd say they're effective. When boards are not behaving this way, when they're not setting goals about what students know and are able to do, they're not actually monitoring progress, we'd say that the board is ineffective. The average behavior nationwide is for boards to be professionally ineffective, is that they do tend to conduct themselves in a manner that allows the business to get transacted, but not in a way that actually lifts up children, in a way that often lifts up adults. And so this is the challenge, is it's possible to be effective, and separate from that is possibly professional. Uh, I am most invested in effectiveness. I'm not discounting professional behavior. I want that as well. But I would never accept a board that says we managed to behave professionally, but that never actually focuses on our children receiving the blessings of education that we owe them. Are we actually setting them up for liberation, or are we continuing to set them up for bondage? That is a question of effectiveness, not a question of professionalism.
Okay, well, thank you, and I appreciate you clarifying that about that, because I do know that when a lot of our work in research, we do look at I may have taken student outcomes behavior, looked at it different from you, and so I really do appreciate you clarifying that. And when you talk about effectiveness, and I presume that we have to be focused, right? And so the next question is going to be like, how does focusing on student outcomes rather than the adult inputs transform district culture? How does that look?
Yeah. In my book, Great on the Behalf, one of the stories I tell is I was watching a school board meeting. And at the culmination of a 45-minute debate, one of the board members slams his fist on the dais and says, I am philosophically opposed to non-yellow school buses, which sounds kind of absurd on the surface. But this is 45 minutes of debate the board had about the color of school buses, which is not the wild part of the story, sadly. Over the next 2 weeks, the superintendent and his team went to work doing research and being thoughtful and trying to come up with plans. Were those plans focused on student learning and student outcomes? No, of course not. They were focused on the color of buses. And over
Right.
those next 2 weeks, the local paper got involved. They read an op-ed. Was that op-ed focused on student outcomes? No, of course not.
No.
It was talking about the color of buses. And the teachers union, they got involved. Local labor got involved, and they read a survey of their members. Was that survey about student outcomes? No, it was about the color of buses. And then the next board meeting, the superintendent and staff gave this hour-long presentation talking about all the things that they had studied over the past 2 weeks. Were they talking about student outcomes? No, they're talking about the color of buses. And so what it suggests is that what the board focuses on has this really powerful effect, not only on what the community as a whole focuses on, but also what the administration focuses on. Consider in that school district that somewhere in that school district during that 2 week period, there's a little AJ in a third grader in one of those classrooms, and little AJ in that classroom, what he really needed was some help from his teacher. And his teacher wanted to give him that help, but his teacher was kind of struggling, and what his teacher really needed was the support to grow their effectiveness so they could meet the needs of little AJ. The teacher was looking for support from the principal, but the principal wasn't available to provide that support because they were kind of struggling in their ability to coach their teachers' instruction. And what they were really looking for was some coaching and instruction that had been promised them by the superintendent. But the superintendent wasn't focused on getting them that coaching and instruction the principal needed that week, because the superintendent was focused on the color of buses. And so the principal didn't get what they need, and the teacher didn't get what they need. And little AJ in that classroom for those 2 weeks didn't get what he needed either. Like, what happens in the boardroom echoes in the classroom. And so we can't discount the powerful cultural impact that school boards have on their institutions, that wherever the board is focusing its time, talent, its treasure, it is incentivizing the entire organization and often the entire community to focus there as well. And so when the board spends the majority of its time at the board meeting talking about the color of buses, trust and believe that you're going to have a whole bunch of other people talking about the color of buses. But so too, when the board says, you know what, we're going to spend half of our time really digging into, what is the experience? What's the quality of instruction taking place in the classroom, and what supports are teachers needing that they've been crying out for that have not yet been responded to, and what have we done that's worked, and what have we done that hasn't worked, and when they're having this type of accountability conversation with the superintendent about how are we supporting our staff to improve the quality of instruction that little AJ is experiencing in that classroom, that when boards focus half of their time every month in that manner, it gives permission to everyone in the organization to be more focused on, are we actually creating the conditions for student success, as opposed to, are we getting the right Pantone color of buses this month?
Okay. All right. You that mantra, student outcomes don't change, so adult behaviors change. It's something that set with me when I met you back in Fifth Ward at Phyllis Wheatley High School.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell the story as like I ran behind that message because I was like, wait, you can't just come here and say that student outcomes don't change, so adult behaviors change. I had just graduated my last daughter from high school. I felt like I did what I needed to do. And so that is something that I believe resonates a lot with many people. Can you expound on that? Like, kind of share, that philosophy, that mantra that you have there.
Yeah, when I think I appreciate the question, because I think a lot of people misunderstand the statement here. That when I say the student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, what I really mean by that is that I have to constantly be willing to interrogate my own behaviors to look at in what way they align or not aligned with improvements in student outcomes. That have to constantly be looking at what could I be doing differently that would better lay the foundation. In fact, where did I put that?
What do you have?
I mean, because I've got my hoodie. Student outcomes don't change until adult behavior change. But I think people hear this part, but they don't actually understand the real message, because the real message is actually on the back of the hoodie.
Starting with me, yeah.
And so this is an expectation This is a commitment that I make for myself, to the students that I serve, that I'm just going to be constantly willing to interrogate my own choices, my own adult behaviors, and look for what are openings for action where I can be more aligned with the needs of the children in my community tomorrow than I was yesterday. The student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, starting with me.
Right. Well, in the intro, I mentioned how our legislature out here in Texas, we actually have defined what the role is and responsibility of school boards. We have defined that and how they have to govern collectively, with the superintendent. How can board members actually honor their duty to govern collectively while representing their community voice?
Yeah, so there's some misconception here,
Hmm.
that it is not individual school board members who represent the vision and values of the community. It's the board as an entity that represents the vision and values. This is how our democracy works. Our democracy, our representative democracy, doesn't purport that any one person gets to say this is what is true for everyone. That's not how school boards work. School boards are made up of a group of people in most places across the country, somewhere between 5, 7, or 9 board members collectively make up the board. And the way our system works is that those people, when acting collectively, represent the vision and values of the community. So no one board member gets to stand up and say, "Well, I alone represent." You could say that, but what you're also saying is, "I don't actually believe in representative democracy. I don't actually believe in the voice of the people. I don't believe that these other board members, that the people that they represent, I don't believe those people deserve a voice." That's what you're saying in that moment when you try to supplant the voice of the board as a whole with your own voice. It it is immature behavior of people who don't actually believe in our values of a representative democracy. They say they do when it suits them, but that's behavior that describes that they don't actually believe in it. That to believe in it means that I acknowledge the authority of the board when acting as a body to be the voice of the community, even if I disagree with it. And I'm not required to agree with every decision that the school board makes. Certainly, when I was a school board member, as a 9-member board, even as board chair, there were a lot of 8-1 votes where I'd be the one person, losing the vote, and my 8 colleagues voting a different direction. And invariably, the media would run up to me. Okay, okay, you, a righteous man. You voted against this thing that the other board members. Can you explain to us, why the other board, members, have gone astray? And I realized over time that they didn't really believe any of that. They were just playing to my ego, trying to get a soundbite. And what I came to after kind of meditating on this for a while was that I would respond to those questions the same way. That I trust the wisdom of the board. I trust this community's representatives as a whole body, and the collective wisdom of the community's representatives. I trust that. And so the board has made its decision. You saw it, and I stand behind it completely. Well, didn't you vote against it? Well, you were here. You saw how the vote went. So why are you asking questions you already know? It's like, well, so aren't you opposed to this decision? It's like, no, I trust the wisdom of the board. And this is just a part of being in a representative democracy that our school boards are, is that there is a community voice that is larger than my voice. And I respect that. And I support that.
Right, right. So, one thing that I've noticed, because I've had an opportunity just by being involved in this work with what you do, and even with my partner Dr. Anthony, I've had opportunity to go to conferences and stuff like that to actually meet school board members as well as superintendents. And one of the things that I would hear, they would always have workshops about their relationship between the superintendent and his board. And so, what defines a strong board and superintendent partnership built on like the accountability and trust, um, for if you're serving on the school board? What does that look like?
Yeah, you asked why do school boards exist, and they exist to represent the vision and values of the community. What flows from that is that superintendents exist to implement the vision and values of the community. Where things get real sideways is when board members, not even the board usually, it's usually board members, decide that they want to implement the vision and values of the community, that is now somehow their expertise, when in general it's not. Or when the superintendent decides that they want to represent the vision and values of the community, that they want to supplant the board's wisdom with their own wisdom as superintendent. Both of
So,
these are
so
flawed.
right there, that's two different, right? You're talking about one is governing and one is actually managing, right?
Yeah, and when the board members try to manage, this creates problems, and when the superintendent tries to govern, this creates problems because they're not playing to their strengths.
Mhm.
The expertise of the superintendent is implementation of the community's vision and values, not representation. Nobody elected the superintendent. The the expertise of the board is representation of the vision, values, and community. Nobody elected the board members to go out and try to be the superintendent. They elected the board members because, hey, you know what? This person, their values match my values. Their vision for our children matches my vision. And that's why I'm going to vote for them. And so whenever we vote for folks, we head to that ballot box. What we're really saying is this person, they represent me. That my vision and my values, I can see them in this person, and that's why I'm selecting them. Not because I think that they would make a great superintendent. That's not why school board members are selected. And so when each rep recognizes their own strengths, what is the power that they uniquely bring to the equation? uh, when they recognize and honor that and lean into their respective strengths, that what governance teams, the board and the superintendent collectively, can get done is much greater than when everybody is trying to play every other role outside of the ones that are really their own area of strength.
Oh, thank you. You know, in your book, I remember reading on Integrate on their behalf, where we talked about school board governance and how to help boards improve in their governance. That you recommend a governance coach, like you and your team. Y'all break it down very simple, and help boards recognize areas that they can improve and help them in staying focused. So can you tell how can governance coaches really help boards navigate that conflict that tend to be in there and transition or the change? That how can they navigate that?
Yeah, and so one thing that every uh, Super Bowl championship team has in common, every single one of them, every single team that's ever won the Super Bowl has one thing in common. They all showed up with a coach. And every team that's ever won a World Series or World Cup, they all got one thing in common. When the team showed up, they brought their coach with them. What it tells us is that when performance matters, when we really value performance at the highest levels, we instinctively say, you know what, let's make sure the people who are out on the field, the people who are playing the game, let's make sure that they're supported by a coach. Let's supported by somebody who is not on the field, but is watching from the sidelines, who has some experience with what it's like to be on the field, and can help offer insights to help them be more effective in their role. We understand this innately in education because we provide coaching for teachers, we provide coaching for principals, and often we even provide coaching for superintendents. What I'd certainly recommend is that we also provide coaching for school boards. That this just be a natural part of what every school system does. Is that when performance matters, that we want our folks who are kind of on the field, the folks who are performing in their particular roles, that they have access to the coaching they need to be really effective. And so, my team and I, there are 14,000 school districts nationwide, roughly. My team and I have our hands full, so we don't really have space to support more districts right now. But there are other coaches out there, and so we just encourage folks to go and look and find a coach. If your superintendent doesn't have a coach, encourage them to get one. Whether they've been a superintendent for 1 year or for 20 years, they'll be more effective if they have a thought partner who is helping them be reflective in their practice. In the same way that we'd say that teachers being reflective in their practice and having coaching that supports that helps them be more effective. Boards are the same, is that they And to the extent that they have coaching that can support them in being reflective in their practice, they can help them perform in a manner that better matches what's written on their hearts.
Well, right now we're currently in election season. Soon we'll be choosing board members throughout Texas. And so, what would you advise a candidate or a new board member? What is it that they need to understand before actually taking office?
Um, so first, why do school systems exist? That'd be helpful to know if you're going to run for the school board. Second, why do school boards exist? Third, why do superintendents exist? These are some basic things. Um, but one of the reasons it's important to understand why school boards exist is the moment you realize that school boards exist to represent the vision and values of the community, then what it means is that anyone who is willing and able to put in the work necessary to represent the vision, values, and community. That means doing a lot of listening. It means going to a lot of meetings. It means really having your ear to the heart of the community. Anyone who's willing to put in the work and who is legally eligible uh, has the qualifications to be a school board member. This is important to me because I often hear people make claims that are not only inaccurate, but I think are harmful. They'll claim that, well, the only people who should be on the school board are folks who've been superintendents. I think this is harmful. I think this is really problematic, or folks who've been principals or teachers or educators of some sort. The reason I think this is harmful is because what it's saying to parents is that you don't actually have a role, that you lack the ability to represent the vision and values of our community. And I think that's deeply problematic. And so I would say to any parent out there, regardless of their background, you don't have to, come from an education background. People would say, "Oh, well, you have to be an attorney, but you don't have to be an attorney." Oh, you have to be an accountant. No, you don't have to be a financial expert. The only thing you need expertise in is in representing the vision and values of the community, and that is about listening. That is about really being attuned to what is going on in my community and being willing to put in the time to listen and to represent what you hear. And so, folks who are willing and able to do that, they are fully qualified, as long as they are legally eligible to serve as school board members. And so, I would just put that out to every community member, every teacher, every parent, every student who's ever been suggested to them that they somehow lack the credibility to be a board member. Like, set all that aside. That as long as you are willing to represent the vision and values of the community, you have all the credibility you need to step forward and say to your community that I'm ready to serve.
Well, when you talk about that with the board members, potential candidates to run on the board, what training is available before they get there? I know that there's a program that I saw that I believe you had is on onboarding program, and I actually started something similar to that within the work that we do because I feel that, well, knowing and seeing some of the stuff, but is there other trainings that you would recommend to candidates?
Yeah, so certainly what I did in my own district, and we encourage every board to do in their own districts. My most recently, I was with DeSoto, and what we did in DeSoto ISD was we put together what I refer to as school board school, which is just a training for community members. Anybody in the community who wants, we said anyone who lives, works, worships, or plays in the community, that if they have an interest in learning more, then we want them to learn more, whether they plan to run for the school board or not. And so we'd run school board school a few times a year to just really try to make sure that there's as much information out in the ambient community as possible about what does it look like to be intensely focused on improving student outcomes. What does it look like to really be dialed into our children learning or children growing? Are we investing in them the knowledge and skills necessary to live a choice-filled life? That's what I would want people to constantly have access to. And our charge is that the board needs to make access to that, as the board needs to go out of its way to make sure that it is providing opportunities for the entire community, anyone who is interested in learning about effective governance, that the school board needs to make a way out of no way for the folks to know that. And some school boards members will say, well, I don't want to do that because won't I just be training the people who want to run against me? And to that, my response is, you've got to make a decision. Is your allegiance to you, or is your allegiance to children? If your allegiance is to children, then you will have a vested interest in making sure that everybody in this community has deep insights into what effective school board governance looks like. If you are only about you, then you have a vested interest in being a gatekeeper to try to keep as many other people out of understanding how school boards work. So you just got to decide, whose team are you on? Are you on children's team, or are you on your team? If you're on children's team, this makes all the sense in the world. If you're on your team, yeah, ignore everything I've said.
Right. The community engagement piece is extremely important, and that's something I take to heart. And so when I was president of Phyllis Wheatley Alumni Association, and I, saw what was happening in the school system, and knowing that is not what my background was, I had no background in that. And so because I do feel that everything that we do in every system, it should be in the best interest of the student. And that's why I, continue to, take those courses and learn about what it is. And it helped me, put me in a position where I know how to communicate, at the district level, at the campus level, about certain things. Was it a learning curve? Yes, it was definitely a learning curve for me. But it's important that community know, especially when the parents have issues, or maybe the community or organization have an issue about something within the system. That's an important conversation to know. And so that's why I asked about, what knowledge and what other training, can candidates take, before they actually consider being on the board. One of the things that hit me hard is just believing. Do you believe that we can do better? Do you believe these children can do better? Do you believe in them? Right. I believe that's extremely important. And so, and which goes on, how can communities like this organization, help those future board members about real responsibilities about being on the school board? How can they better help them do that?
Well, and one of the things I was really proud that we did in DeSoto is it was actually the board members who provided much of the training. And so they certainly could have relied on their school board coach or other parties to provide the training. But it's actually the board members that said, you know what, this is our community. We owe an allegiance to our community to constantly be training folks on what does it look like to be effective in school board work, even if that means that we're actively training people who are ultimately going to run against us, that our allegiance is more to the well-being of our children than it is to our own political well-being. And so it's actually the board members who led those. I think we call it Trustee Academy. I think is what we call it in DeSoto. But yeah, like there is a path to helping make sure that we're not being gatekeepers, that we're not guarding information and keeping the community out of it, out of its own information, out of its own business, that instead that we're opening up those doors of insight, of opportunity to as many folks in the community who have an interest to come out.
Yeah, because especially when you say that school boards represent the vision and values of the community, right? And with that, and they come out and they speak to the community, it's important that the community also know what they're actually talking about, why the school boards is actually coming out and talking to them, and Absolutely. What they should be talking to them about. I attended several not workshops, but meetings that school board had come out to talk to the community, and it was like night and day. They were not aligned at all in the conversation. And it just, it showed that we were not aware of why the school boards were actually coming out and what they were talking about. So, and they do come out, right, to speak to the community and find out what they want. What do they see as what they envision for their children?
Well, and I would distinguish here between the wants and interest of individual community members and the vision and value of the community. So my insistence is that board members are constantly seeking to try to understand as much of the vision and value of the community as possible, so that when they come together with their fellow board members, that collectively the board is really, really strong at representing the vision and values of the community. But I would distinguish that from representing the wants and desires of individual community members. I tell a story about Miss Johnson. It's a Miss Johnson in every neighborhood. My neighborhood, Miss Johnson was probably a great grandmother, but she was a little old lady on the block who sat on the front stoop and kind of watched over everything. And if you wasn't acting right, she'd be the first one to explain it to you. And so Miss Johnson kind of held it down for her block. And people respected Miss Johnson for this. So when Miss Johnson, came calling and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you," obviously I'm going to run and go talk to Miss Johnson. And what she said to me one day was, "Hey, we need a stop sign on the end of this block." And I'd just gone through some of my community organizer training, and it said that if you push on an issue, eventually get to the value underneath the issue. So I said, "Miss Johnson, why is the stop sign important to you?" She said, "Well, because these cars are going too fast, baby. These cars are going too fast." I said, "Well, why do you care these cars are going too fast? Well, these kids are trying to play. Why do you care these kids?" "Well, it's just not safe." And so when I pushed on the issue of a stop sign, eventually I got to the value underneath the issue, which was about safety. She was worried about the safety of the kids on the block. The stop sign is an issue. Safety is the value. It is not the job of board members to represent the issues and wants of individual community members. It is the job of board members to represent the vision and values of the community as a whole. And so what I did is after our visit with Ms. Johnson, I went around and I knocked on some other neighbors' doors because I was a neighborhood vice president at the time, and I said, "Hey, Ms. Johnson's kind of worried about some of the cars going fast. Are you all worried about that? She's thinking about stop sign. What are you all thinking?" And then so we talked to 30 or 40 other people up and down a few blocks. And it turns out that a lot of people were worried about safety. A lot of people had concern about the kids. And so I talked to Teresa, city planner, and I shared with her, "Hey, this is a concern that I hear up and down the block. Do we have funds in the third district, to help pay for this?" And she said, "Yeah, well, we could do a number of things. We have a stop sign, we have a speed bump, we could turn it into a cul-de-sac, we could make it a two-way street instead of one-way street. That tends to slow things down. We can make it one lane instead of two lanes. That tends to slow things down." So we talked about a lot of different options. And at the end of all that, the city came out couple weeks later and installed a new speed bump to slow down the traffic so that it would be safer for the kids on the block. I go back to Miss Johnson. I'm super excited. I'm fired up. "Hey, Miss Johnson, hey, I know you're super concerned about safety. Guess what? We got it taken care of. We got a speed bump out here." Janice, was Miss Johnson happy with me?
No, she was not.
She was
That's not
not
what she
even
wanted.
remotely happy, not even a little bit. I got cussed out by that little old woman that day. Was they called everything but a child of Christ.
Oh
Miss
wow.
Johnson was not. She was not having it because what did Miss Johnson want?
And she wanted what she asked for.
She wanted what she wanted. She said she
Yeah.
wanted that stop sign, and she wanted to hit a stop sign. But here's the important insight: as the neighborhood leader, did I do my job to represent the vision and values of my community?
Yes, you did.
Absolutely. The value of the community in that specific instance was the value around safety, and I did my job to help provide safety for that community and safety for the kids on that block. That I failed to represent the specific issue, the specific want of a community member is noteworthy, but is not my job. And it's the same on the school board. The job of the board is not to represent the wants and the issues of individual community members. It's a Miss Johnson on every block out here. The job of the school board is to represent the vision and values of the community collectively, even if that doesn't sync up with the folks who are politically powerful, and the folks who have the biggest microphone and the people who are heard the most. That our job is not to cater to those folks. Our job is to represent the vision and values of the community.
And that effective governance work that we do, that I had the pleasure to be a part of. Man, I love it. It's definitely transforming. Starting with me.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know that boards do is they have to evaluate themselves.
Mhm.
What does that look like? How do board members feel about evaluating if they are actually doing meeting the expectation of a trustee?
Yeah. So first, I would say this is actually kind of not obvious that this would be something that makes sense. And so a long time ago, a team and I put together a national survey of large school boards across the nation. And we asked a lot of questions, but one of the questions that always stuck out to me was around whether or not the board engaged in any type of self-evaluation practice. And what we found from the survey after we then compared it with some national student performance data was that the majority of school boards did not in any way self-evaluate. But of the ones that did, for the set of school systems where the board self-evaluated, their students tended to grow slightly fast at a slightly faster rate, that their rate of growth was slightly higher than the set of all students served by school boards that did not self-evaluate. That, along with a variety of other studies that we've seen over the years, has led me to believe that boards really are culture setting institutions. And though the board sets a culture of we will publicly and transparently self evaluate and look at our own behavior and identify where it is and isn't aligned with improvements in student outcomes, that we will do that publicly as a school board, that it begins to make safe the idea that other education leaders in the system would do so as well. That the superintendent would take stock of, well, what is my behavior, and where have my actions worked and not worked to serve children well, and that frees up principals to do the same, and frees up teachers to do the same, and well, it frees up students to do the same. That when the board models the humility and the integrity necessary to really stop and say, have we collectively as a board honored our word? Have we honored what we've allowed people to expect that we would do? To really be focused on student outcomes. That when the board does that publicly, transparently, unapologetically, and, and honestly, that really begins to create a different type of culture in a school system. And so this is why we strongly recommend the board self-evaluate, that they do so publicly, that they don't hide out in a closed session, but they write out in front of public, say, here are the standards of behavior that we're going to adhere to, that are going to have us be intentionally focused on improving student outcomes. And here's the instrument we're going to use to monitor our own progress, that once per quarter, not even yearly, once per quarter, every 3 months, that we're going to pull out this instrument. We're going to look to what degree are our behaviors more aligned with improvements in student outcomes than they were 3 months ago. And that when boards behave this way, that something about this seems to begin to create a different type of culture in that school system where it's safer, psychologically safe for the adults all throughout the organization to be engaged in their own self-evaluation practice, to rigorously, to ruthlessly evaluate what are the ways that my adult behavior could change to be more aligned with improvements in student outcomes.
I really like that because, so often I know I am ready to point the finger at someone else. And so, to get away
Yeah.
from that blame game and say, oh, it's their fault, or, it's his fault or her fault. But just being able to see, am I doing the work that I have, set out to do? Am I representing, the vision and values of our community? And how am I taking that voice? What does that look like? Is that work being done? And to be able to go back and reflect on that, I think that's amazing work to actually have implemented at any board level. But when we talk about being focused and student outcomes, I think just to clarify, they do monitor, right? So what data, should candidates or new, not just candidates, just board members, what data should they be familiar with when they have this conversation, like with the superintendent? Because the community is looking. We don't know. We don't understand what is this that they talking about. Why are they looking at scale? So, how important is that conversation for the community?
Yeah, this is really important. Is that there's a lot of pretending that takes place where we pretend that we're paying attention to our children actually growing or not, but then we never actually stop to check. We never look at the receipts to figure out, have children actually grown in some way that is discernible. The surefire way to avoid providing justice for children who look like me is to never inquire into have they actually grown, because then we don't have to be accountable for answering the question, why didn't little AJ grow? Only when we stop and say, here's what our expectation is, and then we look at data from time to time to figure out, are we closer to that expectation or not, do we then position ourselves to actually have a meaningful dialogue around, has little AJ grown? But if we want to avoid justice for children, then let's avoid actually looking at any evidence of whether or not they've grown. Now, the question you ask is, which evidence should we be looking at? That is a that is a school system by school system decision. Each community, each school board specifically, needs to go out and listen to their community, find out what are the things that the community values most that children know and are able to do, and then set SMART goals about student outcomes in those areas. And then data based on those things is what the school system, the school board should be paying attention to. And so I think where a lot of people get this mixed up is they think that what we're suggesting is that there is one specific set of metrics that every school board should look at, and that is not what we hold at all. What we hold is that school boards represent the vision and values of the community. And so if the board goes out and listens to the community, and what the community says is what we most want to see is our children to have skills in underwater welding, then the board needs to come up with a way of measuring how we know if children are growing in the area of underwater welding. I use that as an example because this actually came up. There's a community along, the Gulf Coast, not surprisingly, that they wanted to see that children had more opportunities in the area of welding, in the area of scuba diving, and then you put those together. And the reason is because there are some amazing jobs in that particular region of the Gulf Coast in those areas. And so for that community, that was important to them. They saw this as an opportunity for their children that they may not have had themselves. I'm not here to tell that community that they're right or wrong for wanting that for their children. That's for each community to decide for themselves. But once a community decides, here's what we most want students to know and be able to do, wherever that leads, whether that is underwater welding, whether that's metacognition and self-regulation, whether that's reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever it is that the community says we most want to see our students know and be able to do, that's what the board has to get busy setting goals around, challenging the superintendent to bring data on a monthly basis to show, are we actually moving the needle for our students in the areas of the community's vision?
And that's really important, just that monitoring conversation alone, to just see if we are moving students along, the students are growing. Which, as you were sharing what you just shared with us, it made me think about, your book, Our Tools That They, that They Deserve. And I remember when you first started writing that book, it was like, we deserve those tools. How can I say they deserve them? Yeah. It's like, I need that help. I didn't know this. Yeah. But tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of I just, when I read the books, it's like they complement each other, right? And like I said, when you say our tools they deserve, I'm like, let me learn how to use this first. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get ready to end our show?
Yeah, where Great on Their Behalf is a book that's all about school board leadership and how school boards be intensely focused on improving student outcomes. Our Tools They Deserve is about the other body of work that I've been engaged in, actually longer than I've been engaged with school boards, which is around student-led restorative practices, really empowering students to lead the culture and climate in their respective buildings by providing them with the tools that they need and they deserve, tools that are going to set them up to be successful both in school and in life beyond. The 6 main tools that the book focuses on are responsibility, accountability, metacognition, active listening, self-regulation, and empathy. And that there's just a growing body of research literature that suggests as children grow in these areas, as they develop these tools more and more, that they have a greater ability to secure for themselves success, both in the classroom and beyond.
Okay, thank you. Because I think about that, especially when I think about the discipline in some of our schools, the high rates, student population that have high discipline. And it made me think about those different practices and stuff like that. So, AJ, I really cannot express how I appreciate your time on this evening. And I mean, you're doing such amazing work. I mean, you have been, you exemplify leadership, effective leadership. And I really appreciate that. Like I say, the work that you're doing, you and your team are doing it's some amazing work. I use those tools for myself. I've seen transformation in my relationships, in so many of the relationships that I have. I've seen this transformation work. So when you said how student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, started with me, started with you. I mean, I always start with myself, and I'm like, how can I better improve? And when I realized what it meant, I realized that I had not been involved in the school system other than being like, the traditional parent, like send kids to school, go to school, you're there on time. make sure that every day. That's what I would do. Not worried about the teacher, because I had threatened my kids. I was like, don't let that teacher call me, So, I didn't realize what it was. It's like when I made the choice to truly be involved and be engaged with what was actually happening at the schools. And my daughters are grown now. I just have my grandbaby. But when I made the choice to just say, you know what, I'm going to be involved. I have something to give back. How can I better support this? And I just have, the work just have grown like crazy for myself. And definitely wasn't my intention or plan. I'm just like trying to save somebody. But again, this is great work, and I really appreciate you, your time, your team. I really appreciate that. You gave me some great partners. I mean, I love my partner. He's great. I mean, patient with Janice, you've been patient with me. So I just really thank you all for just allowing me to be on this journey with y'all. It's great work, and we're doing some amazing things out here. And we know that it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But each of us play a part, and I believe everyone have the best interests of the kids, want to see these children do better because they are the future. And so thank you. Would you like to say the last words before you part?
I'm just grateful that you continue to run and not grow weary.
Okay. I have been getting there. But I think it's the 2-day workshops, which we didn't talk about, but the 2-day workshops are amazing. I mean, they're nothing like taking the courses, the year-long courses, but the 2-day workshop is amazing. So, we're going to do more of that out here in Houston, and hopefully you'll come back and visit with us, right?
Happy to come on the show.
and do the workshop as well, right? You got to come out and visit us for the workshop. That'll be great. We'll love to have you do that again with us. And so to our listeners, remember, your vote and your voice matter. School board election is not a political event. They are community commitments. And so, guys, I love you. I appreciate you taking the time to join AJ Crable and myself on this evening. I hope something was said that's going to help you be more engaged, more involved in what's happening at our schools. And remember, whether you're a parent or organizational leader, a superintendent, whatever, you have a role. Parents, you are partners in this education system. Organizations, we are all partners in this work, and we have to come together in order to improve what's happening in our school districts. So thank you for your time.